Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Juta Padakamalam Sri Gurun.
Hare Krishna, Mancha Kapa Turubhyashta Kripa Sindhuvevacha Patitanam Pavanebha Vaishnaveva Namo Namaha Om Agyana Timaranda Sagyananchana Shalakaya Chokshushan Militang Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gaudavani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shanvari Pashtatta Deshatarane. Hare Krishna. Welcome back to the Bhakti Shastri course. In our last lesson, we were discussing the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Attaining the Supreme, Akshar Brahma Yog. We were discussing the principles of transmigration, Yoga Mishra Bhakti, Ananda Bhakti, was explained by Sri Krishna, comparing the spiritual and the material worlds, and how the pure devotee who is practicing Ananda Bhakti, his passage to the Supreme Abode is guaranteed by devotional service. In this lesson, we'll be examining verses 1 to 12 of the 9th chapter, Raja Vidya Raja Guya Jog. Prabhupada's commenting in the purport to text 1, Lord Krishna, in order to encourage Arjuna to higher and higher elevation in his potent service, describes in this 9th chapter matters more confidential than any he has already disclosed. So let's examine how this is more confidential knowledge. In chapter 7, Krishna was explaining how to fix his mind, how one can fix the mind, Maya Shaktamana, fixing the mind on Krishna, how Krishna is the source of everything. Surrender to Krishna, Mameviye prapadyante mayametam tarantite. Demigod worship and the impersonalists are all described. The demigod worship is described as alpa medha, and the impersonalists are described as abudhaya, unintelligent. In chapter 8, Akshara Brahma Jog, the specific goal of life of remembering Krishna at the time of death and principles of transmigration are very clearly explained by Sri Krishna. Ananda Bhakti is also introduced by the Lord, unalloyed pure devotional service, and how by practice of unalloyed pure devotional service one is guaranteed to attain the Supreme. In chapter 9, the Raja Vijaraja Guya Yog, most confidential knowledge, the practice of Ananda Bhakti. In the 8th chapter also, Ananda Bhakti is introduced. However, Yoga Mishra Bhakti is also mentioned, and the concluding portions of the 8th chapter also describe the Satchakra Yoga system of attaining the Brahma Jyoti, or the heavenly planets. So we'll see that the 9th chapter, however, is dealing exclusively with the subject of Ananda Bhakti, pure devotional service, particularly the practice of pure devotional service. The symptoms of the Mahatma are described, and also Krishna is partial to the Ananda Bhakti. Some special facilities that Krishna provides, that Krishna makes available for those who are practicing Ananda Bhakti, and thus constitute most confidential instructions, which we will examine in the next lesson. Srila Prabhupada comments in the purport to text 1, the very beginning of Bhagavad Gita, the first chapter, is more or less an introduction to the rest of the book. And the 2nd and 3rd chapters, the spiritual knowledge described is called confidential. Topics discussed in the 7th and 8th chapters are specifically related to devotional service, and because they bring enlightenment in Krishna consciousness, they're called more confidential. But the matters which are described in the 9th chapter deal with unalloyed pure devotion. Therefore, this is called the most confidential. Let us take a look at text number 2, a very important verse, often quoted by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. Rajavidya Rajaguyam Pavitram Idam Uttamam Pratyaksha Vagamam Dharmyam Shushukam Kartam Abhyayam. This knowledge is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. It is the purest knowledge, and because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, it is the perfection of religion. It is everlasting, and it is joyfully performed. Prabhupada is, in his lengthy purport, he is examining the different components of this verse. Raja Vijaya Raja Guyam. Prabhupada's commenting how so many educational institutions are there in the world, universities, etc. However, none of them are explaining the Atma Tattva Gyan, science of the soul, nor are they explaining the constitutional function of the soul, devotional service. However, in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is explaining the eternal nature of the soul and constitutional position of the soul, Krishna's eternal servant, and therefore this constitutes the king of education and the most confidential knowledge. Pavitram Uttamam. Pavitra is purification, and Uttam means the purest knowledge. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada quotes from the Padma Purana, which is also quoted by Srila Rup Goswami Prabhupada in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu on the topic of Kleshagni, how practice of devotional service immediately destroys material misery. And he's examining the fact that miseries are a result of sinful activity, and how by practice of devotional service all types of sinful reactions are removed. Aparabdha palam papam kutam bijam palanmakam kramanaiva praliyate Vishnu bhakti ratatmanam. By the practice of Vishnu bhakti, kramanaiva, gradually or phase by phase, praliyate is complete destruction of the aparabdha and parabdha palam, the sinful reactions that we may be experiencing in relation to previous sins. That's called parabdha karma. And there's also aparabdha karma, which is sinful reactions that as yet we haven't experienced. And there's also kutam. Kutam is inclination for a sinful inclination, a tendency to perform sin. Kutam bijam is a seed, a specific desire for a sinful activity. Kutam bijam palanmukam. Palanmukam means the sinful reactions which we are experiencing currently. So all of these different phases of sinful reactions, kramanaiva praliyate, are gradually destroyed, Vishnu bhakti ratatmanam, by the practice of devotional service. And thus it is the pavitram uttam, it is the topmost and most purifying process. Regarding pratyaksha vagamam dharmyam, Srila Prabhupada gives the example of Narad Muni, who just by some brief association, the Bhakti Vedantas were staying in the presence in the village during the 4 months of the rainy season, and Sri Narad Muni had the opportunity to serve those Bhakti Vedantas, take the remnants of their food, and hear Krishna Katha from their lips. And Prabhupada's explaining that as a result of that association, a taste for hearing and chanting the glories of the Lord developed, and a great desire for devotional service. He had direct experience of awakening, devotional awakening, and attraction to serve Krishna as a result of these simple activities of devotional service: sadhu sangha, bhakta seva, prasad seva, ebong sravan kirtanam, these simple activities of devotional service. And very quickly Narad experienced a great awakening in his desire to serve Krishna. Thus devotional service is pratyaksha vagamam dharmyam. It is directly experienced. Prabhupada says no need to get a certificate from someone. If we're satisfied with eatables, we're personally experiencing the change and the benefit, and this can be experienced initially at the initial stages of devotional practice by every devotee. In this way, it is the pratyaksha vagamam dharmyam. It is perfection of religion, and it is directly experienced. Susukam kartum abhyayam. Prabhupada's commenting in his purport that susukam, devotional service, is very easy to perform. Simply by sitting and hearing, one can advance in devotional service. Or one can eat the remnants of food offered to Lord Hari, Krishna Prasad Seva. Or one can offer Krishna the simple items, patram pushpam palam talyam, a leaf, a flower, a fruit or water, and these items are available everywhere in the world. Even a poor man can acquire these items. Therefore, devotional service is susukam. It is very easy to perform. It is very joyful, and it is susukam kartam abhyayam. It is eternal. Prabhupada's commenting in his purport that this verse refutes the impersonalist idea that after liberation, the identity of the jiva merges with the Supreme. Krishna explains here that kartam abhyayam, devotional service, is everlasting and eternally performed, so the jiva retains its individuality after liberation and continues in a relationship with the Lord, as evidenced in this very important verse of Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Srila Prabhupada concludes his purport as follows: thus, the process of devotional service of Krishna consciousness is the king of education and the king of all confidential knowledge. It is the purest form of religion, and it can be executed joyfully without difficulty. Therefore, one should adopt it. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Now, verses 4 to 10 of this 9th chapter, they explain Krishna's relationship with the material world. And these are very significant verses containing extremely deep philosophical concepts. And we will examine some of these concepts verse by verse. Text 4, Krishna explains, Maya tatamidam sarvam jagat avyaktamurtina machthani sarvabhutani nachaham teshu avashtitaha. By me, in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I am not in them. Prabhupada is explaining in this verse that in the avyaktamurti, unmanifest form, Sri Krishna is all-pervading. And at the same time, therefore we can see that everything is Krishna, as was previously explained in the 7th chapter, Bhumir apo nalo vayukam mano buddhirevacha ahankara itimam vinaprakrita astada. 8 separated material elements, and then aparam is tvanyam prakritim vidimeparam jiva bhuta mahava yayidam dayatejaka, the living entity. So the material energy and the jiva tattva, the marginal energy, everything is Krishna's energy. In this way, by expansion of energy, Krishna is all-pervading and present everywhere in the material world. This is described in this verse as the avyaktamurti, through the expansion of energy. In his purport, Srila Prabhupada gives an analogy of the king and different departments. Recently we were traveling in Thailand, and there you'll see, similarly in many of the Middle East countries, you'll find that in every office, in every public place, you'll find the portrait of the king. In Thailand you'll find the portrait of the king displayed and the royal family members. And in this way the presence of the king is permeating throughout the entire country. It's called dominion, the king's domain, and dominating, his influence is dominating throughout the entire domain. But that doesn't mean that the king personally has to be in every office or in every room or in every institute. But his influence is there. So this is a mundane example, but in the same way Prabhupada's explaining that Krishna's simultaneously present everywhere in this material creation. Na chaham teshu abashtitaha. But he is not contained, he is not captured, he is not restricted within the material energy. Na chaham teshu abashtitaha means he's not in the material energy, he's not a product of the material energy. He's separate, he's aloof from the material energy. In text 5 to 8, Krishna is further explaining. Text 5, Krishna explains, Pasham me jogam aishwaryam. Just behold my mystic opulence. Jogam aishwaryam, my mystic power. That he is completely in control of everything in this material world. There's not a minute fraction of functioning or activity going on in this material world which is not under the control of Krishna. And however, he's explaining at the end of text 4 that na chaham teshu avashtitaha. I am not situated in the material energy. So this extreme detachment can only be possible by immense power. Just like Krishna in the next verse, text number 6, he gives an analogy. Understand that as the mighty wind blowing everywhere rests always in the sky, all created beings rest on me. So the wind also has its own potency, and it's blowing here and there, seemingly very powerful. but that wind, it cannot go beyond the jurisdiction of the sky. In the same way, the material energy is functioning, but that is completely under the control of Sri Krishna. In text number 9, Krishna goes on to explain that even though he's ultimately and infinitely and minutely controlling everything in this world, he's completely detached from the creation and from this activity. Na chamam tani karmani nivadanti dhananjaya udasina vadasina shaktam teshu karmashu. O Dhananjaya, all this work cannot bind me. Na chamam tani karmadni nibadanti dhananjaya. Ashaktam teshu karmashu. I am completely detached from all of this. This is yogam aishvaryam, extreme potency, extreme opulence, extreme power. Even the greatest industrialist or business magnate, yes, he can delegate so many aspects of his industrial development and his business to various employees, but it's not that he's completely detached. He's very much attached, and also there are some things that he has to personally do. However, here Krishna is completely ashaktuteshu karmashu, not involved in any of this immense creation. It's extreme opulence. We don't hear in the descriptions of Krishna's pastimes when he's enjoying with the cowherd boys on the bank of the Jamuna. We never hear instances of Krishna exclaiming, "Oh, guys, just hang on. Something going on in the material world. Just give me a few minutes on this. Some crisis I have to attend to. I'll be back shortly." He doesn't even have the Bhav as being the supreme controller. He's Nanda Dulal, Jashoda Nandan, Bangshidari, completely absorbed in intimate pastimes and joyful pastimes with his devotees constantly. Nitya Lila, Radha Krishna Nitya Lila. How is this possible? That being completely in control of every minute fraction of the material creation is under his control, and he's completely detached from that. That is immense, inconceivable potency that the Supreme Lord has. Udasina Vadasinam. He's Udasin, neutral, Vadasinam, situated as neutral, as though neutral. Prabhupada gives an analogy in the purport like High Court judge. So the criminal, he may be sitting in the jail bitterly lamenting, "Oh, it's because of the words, because of the decision of that High Court judge that I'm sitting here. He said 10 years in the jail. Because of that, I'm here." But this is a foolish understanding to consider. It's not because of the words of the judge that the criminal is spending 10 years in the jail. It's because of his criminal activity. And the judge is not accountable at the end of his life for sending so many people to jail or sending people to the gallows. The judge is simply determining the appropriate justice, the implementation of what is just in this case, and he's representing the government, the legislative authority, the Justice Department. He is authorized to represent and judge what's appropriate, and in this, he's personally not responsible for the judgments that he makes. He's very much aloof from that. So in the same way, so many activities going on in the material world, and Krishna cannot be held accountable for that. I remember many years ago when there was a major tsunami in Asia. Thailand was affected, also South India was affected. That was around about year 2000. And I remember in the newspaper, after that tsunami, there was a headline in one newspaper, I think it was a European newspaper, the headline was, "Where is God now?" Where is God now? So this is the perception of the foolish materialists, uninformed, that everything is wrong with the material world, they'll blame God. And the whole idea of the materialistic scientists is that God's kind of got out of control. He's lost control, and so we have to compensate for his inadequacies through material science. And because he's old, he's up there in the clouds, and when he was younger he was a little more together, but now old age and has overtaken him, and you've seen the picture of him with a beard, white beard, he's aged. And so he can't really keep track of everything, and therefore things go wrong, and then we have to compensate for that with material science. This is a poor understanding of the science of God. Miseries in this material world are also under the supervision of the Supreme Lord, but this is in accordance with the activities of the living entities. In the 4th chapter, verses 14 and 15, we were discussing, and also in 5th chapter, text 17, that nadade kashachit papam, that there's no a sin affects Krishna. Even though so much suffering actually is going on under his supervision, Prabhupada gives some analogies to explain this, that everything is under the control of the workers are dependent upon the employer for their salary. Anadir Adir Govinda, the cause of all causes. So the workers are dependent upon the money which is given by the employer, but how they spend their money, the employer is not accountable for that. So the Supreme Lord, he provides all the facility in this material world according to the desire of the living entity, and he doesn't interfere with the decisions that the living entity makes. Another analogy Prabhupada gives is the rain, and all the vegetation is entirely dependent upon the rain, but so much variety of vegetation grows here and there randomly, and in this way there's some limited independence. Actually, an interesting analogy that Prabhupada gives in this connection in Srimad Bhagavatam, when he is discussing the vision of Vyas after hearing from Narad Muni, the importance of Bhagavad Bhakti and being inspired by Narad Muni to compile Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Vyasadeva, he sat down in his ashram on the bank of Saraswati River and he meditated. He was ordered by Narad to Shamadina Anushmaratad Bichestitam, meditate on all of the variety of the creation of the Lord. And he saw there the living entity, he saw the material nature, and he saw the Supreme Lord, and he saw the cause of the living entity suffering. Anato Upashamam Shakshad Bhakti Jogam Adhokshate Lokasha Ajanasha Vidvan Chakra Satya Sanghita. Because they do not understand that forgetting their relationship with the Supreme Lord and becoming absorbed in this material energy, the living entities are suffering. Lokasha ajanasha, they do not know this. Vidvan chakre satya sanghita. And therefore the learned Vyas, he compiled the Srimad Bhagavatam, which explains the science of God and explains the relationship the living entities have with God and the process of removing anato pashamam shakshat, completely removing all miseries, bhakti jogam and hokshajay, by rendering devotional service to the Supreme Lord. In that purport, Srila Prabhupada gives an interesting analogy. He says that the Lord reluctantly places the living entity into the material world, and where his punishments are inflicted upon the living entity, the Lord actually doesn't want the living entity to experience such punishments, and therefore he delegates this responsibility to the material nature, Ma Durga. Ma Durga very diligently inflicts sufferings upon the living entity callously, without any mercy. The Lord is not inclined to do that, and so therefore he delegates that responsibility to the material energy. It is against his will. It's not as the materialists may claim, oh God, how God is allowing this. He unwillingly allows the living entities to become subjected to the miseries of the material nature. He personally doesn't desire to inflict such miseries upon the living entity, but he has no choice. As a result of the living entity's exploitation in the material energy, the material energy reacts in that way. It is called durga, it is called tough. That is the nature of the material energy. Dukhalayam ashashvatam, as designed in that way for our gradual rectification. Prabhupada gives his own experience that when he was young, he was not inclined to go to school. And Gaur Mohan, whenever Prabhupada appealed, today, Baba, I don't want to go to school. Gaur Mohan was very merciful. In fact, Prabhupada comments that he never denied anything that Abhai requested. Prabhupada said his mother was a little more strict, but Gaur Mohan never denied anything that Abhai requested. And so he would say, today I don't want to go to school, Baba, and Gaur Mohan would say, okay, you stay with me, you come to the shop with me. So actually they required to hire an assistant, a servant. They paid him 5 rupees a month. And his responsibility every day was to take Prabhupada to school. And sometimes Prabhupada said he had to tie a rope around him to take him to the school. So Gaur Mohan himself, he couldn't He couldn't punish Abhay in that way, and he had to employ someone to do that, to chastise and restrict in that way. And this analogy it helps us explain the thankless task. In another place in Bhagavatam, Prabhupada explains the thankless task of the material energy to punish the living entities for their miscreant activities. And in this way, Udasina Vadasinam, the Supreme Lord is not responsible for the sufferings and enjoyments that the living entities experience in this material world. Krishna further elucidates in text number 10, Maya jakshena prakriti shuyate characharam hetunanena kunteya jagadvipare vartare. Another very philosophically deep verse. The shuyate characharam, the material energy is functioning and is operating hetunanena kunteya, under its own rule, Prabhupada translates. There's the O son of Kunti, producing all moving and non-moving beings under its rule. Under its rule, Prabhupada explains, hetunanena, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again. So, as a result of glancing over the material energy, Maya ajakshena, by glancing over the material energy, Maya ajakshena, Prakriti hetunanena, the Prakriti has its own dominion, its own authority, its own control, and it functions accordingly. And that is because it is under the supervision of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now the analogy that Krishna is giving here, that ajakshena, is also very significant, because it's indicating that he is not personally contacting the material energy and being affected. As we heard in the previous verses, that ashaktam teshu karmashu, I'm completely detached. And in text number 4, Krishna explains that na chaham teshu avashtita, he's not present in the material energy. Well, how is it that being not present, he can control everything? Here Krishna is explaining, by glancing over the material energy, simply his will, by his ichcha shakti, his glance, everything is functioning. Srishti, Sthiti, Pralaya, Sadhana, Chakti, Eka, Chaya, Vajasya, Bhuvanadi, Vibhati, Durga, Ichchana Rupam. Just like the Lord desires and the material energies like a shadow, just by him functioning, do we come home at the end of the day and say, oh, I'm so exhausted, I've been casting a shadow all day. Whew. It doesn't take any energy to cast a shadow. Chayeva Yasha, and this material world is functioning just like his shadow. So it's not independent of the Lord. Just like the shadow, a shadow is not independent of us, it's completely dependent upon the person casting the shadow, completely under their control, but it doesn't take any energy to cast a shadow. Chayeva Yasha, just like a shadow. Bhuvanani Vibhati Durga. Ichchana Rupan Api Yasha Chacheshta Chesha. The material energy is functioning simply under his desire. And here in Gita, Krishna is explaining in vivid detail how that's possible. By his glance. Prabhupada in the purport explains that through the glance, Shambhu, he injects the living entities into the material nature, but he personally doesn't contact that material energy. Another analogy that Prabhupada gives is like the smelling of flour. That's also a very wonderful analogy, because we can smell the flower and we can become completely conversant in the quality of the flower, the fragrance of the flower, what type of flower that is, rose, champa, kunda, and we don't even have to touch the flower, just by smelling the flower. So the Lord, he is, as the super soul, he's completely aware of the desires of the living entity, and he, through the material energy that's which is under his supervision, the living entity's desires are facilitated according to one's karma. One enjoys happiness and distress in this material world, and that whole functioning program is going on under the supervision of the Supreme Lord without him being personally entangled or involved in any way, completely detached. This is the Yogam Aishwaryam, the extraordinary mystic potency of the Supreme Lord, and his relationship with the material energy and the living entity is very wonderfully explained in these very important verses of Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Now Krishna goes on to explain that this is inconceivable for the mudha, for the unintelligent person. Avajananti, fools deride me. Avajananti mam mudha, the foolish people, deride me. Avajananti mammudha manushim tanamashritam. They deride me when I descend in the human form. Avajanati, they do not know my Avajanati, they do not know my transcendental nature. Parambhavam ajanato, parambhavam. How it's possible that I function in this way. Parambhav, my superior nature. Ajanato, they are not aware of. Mama Bhuta Maheshwaram, how I am the Supreme Lord of all that be. And at the same time, Manushim Tanamashritam, I accepted a human form. Fools deride me when I descend in the human form. They do not know my transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord of all that be. Prabhupada's explaining in his purport to this verse, from the other explanations of the previous verses in this chapter, it is clear that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, although appearing like a human being, is not a common man. Material bodies cannot perform the wonderful acts prescribed in the previous verses. His body here is called Manushim because he is acting just like a man, a friend of Arjuna's, a politician involved in the battle of Kurukshetra. In so many ways, he is acting just like an ordinary man. They cannot imagine that form like that of a human being can simultaneously control the infinite and the minute. Actually, although he is controlling the infinite and the minute, he is apart from the manifestation. It's clearly stated, according to his Yogamashwaryam, his inconceivable transcendental energy, that he can control the infinite and the finite simultaneously, and that he can remain aloof from them. So this is difficult for the avajananti, the foolish, to understand. And therefore, we can see many, even major religions have this misconception. And they don't like the deity. They don't like the concept that God is in a human form. They think that that restricts God, but God is beyond a human form. And therefore they undermine the importance of the deity worship. Many major religions in the world have this concept. That God cannot be contained within the marble, within the metal. That something to be able to create and be able to sustain everything is more than just a person. It's supreme energy. Yes, supreme energy is required, but avajananti, they do not parambhavam ajanato. They do not understand that his mystic potency is such that he enjoys the form of a personality, and at the same time his energy is supreme. Same concept can be seen in the first verse of invocation verse of the Ishopanishad, Om Purnam, that supreme is complete. So therefore, sensual experience also has to be contained within the supreme. One time I was in Bangladesh, Dhaka, at a university. I was invited at the Vishwa Dharma course, the World Religions course. And I was presenting, and we bought samosa from the temple, and they were hot, and we distributed. We were discussing to the students, Goram Shingara Kamon Legeche, they were Bengali. We were asking them, how do you like the hot samosas? Dharun. They enjoyed those samosas. And I said that, so you're able to distinguish between a high quality samosa and a medium quality samosa? We can distinguish. I said, do you think God can distinguish between a high quality samosa and a medium quality samosa? At that time, I could see a few fuses were blowing in their minds. These students were predominantly from another religious another religion, and which doesn't entertain the idea that God has a form. And I asked them, you think God can discriminate between a high quality samosa and a medium quality? What's the answer? Of course he has to do that. So he can taste, he can see, he can hear, he can feel, he can have relationship, he can have love, he can have everything that we have. How is it possible that we can experience these things in this world and God cannot experience them? Om Purnam, he has to have personality. So in this way we can understand the Parambhavam Ajanato. They do not understand his Parambhavam. He is a supreme person, and at the same time his manifest energies are controlling everything, as Prabhupada explains, infinitely and finitely within this material world. To conclude, Prabhupada comments, to accept God as man and to accept man as God, this is rascaldom. We can understand who is an intelligent man and who is a rascal by this criteria. Krishna is canvassing, surrender unto me, but the mudhas, they will not accept it. Avajananti mamudo. Why shall I accept Krishna? I've got my own God, I manufacture God. So we have got a very shortcut criterion to understand a rascal and an intelligent man. What is that? If he is a devotee of Krishna, then he is an intelligent man. If he is not, then he is a rascal. That's all. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. In this lesson we were discussing Rajavidya Rajaguyam, the purest, directly experienced Susukam Kartam, devotional service. Krishna is glorifying the elevated nature of devotional service, and we were discussing the amazing relationship that Krishna has with the material energy, how he is with the material world, how through his expansion of energy he is controlling everything in minute detail, and simultaneously nateshu avashtitaha, he is completely detached from and transcendental to the material creation. Hare Krishna.